The remarkable thing is that in 10 years, the National Water Initiative has really provided a foundation for how Australia thinks about water management. That sounds easy, but in fact that was very hard won. The initiative created a consensus amongst different interest groups who have very different interests in water, about how water should be managed, and it resolved some very thorny problems that had been besetting the sector for a long time. In particular, the problem about how water is to be allocated between these different interests. We take that for granted now, but it really provided a foundation for tackling some of the substantial issues that arose during the first decade, not least of which, of course, the millennial drought and that very long period of time where water resources in rural and regional Australia were really scarce. So that was quite remarkable, because up to that point there had been, as I say, a very fierce contest about how the interests of the environment could be reconciled to the interest of agricultural production. And to have environment groups and agricultural interests coming together and saying, yes, we can work with this framework, was, I think, a fantastic achievement. It has a mixture of principle, so the basic framework for how water is to be managed, and then very specific actions for governments to put those principles into practice in the way that they legislate for water management and the way they actually do it. So the reporting framework meant that there was a real focus on, did governments live up to their commitments, and by and large they did. Greater or slower progress in different jurisdictions, but they were all certainly focused on the task. Later it allowed a gradual more sophistication in the reporting through the triennial reports, until it really focused on the outcomes and whether the National Water Initiative was delivering the environmental, economic and social outcomes that had been hoped of it. And again, that's really quite a remarkable journey to be able to move to that degree of sophistication within less than a decade is, I think, a testament to the fact that there was once it was in place, very little continuing debate about the principles themselves. And I think all of us that are associated with the National Water Initiative feel particularly proud of the place that it created for trade between irrigators, but also with the later arrangements about the Basin Plan, also essentially trade between productive use and environmental use. And again, I think that's a fantastic achievement, and one that really is envied all around the world. Very few other countries have been able to resolve those problems in this kind of way. One of the things that I reflect on with the 2011 triennial assessment is it demonstrated that the framework was sound and really was not challenged by anybody, but to get the results from it, there was still a long way to go. The Water Act and the intentions for the Basin Plan took as its foundation, again, the principles of the National Water Initiative, and so that was obviously a very major process that was needed to be done to put a plan in place across the whole Murray-Darling Basin that would be able to give effect to the adjustment that was required to meet the needs of the environment in terms of getting that allocation. In terms of the results, you could see that that was unfinished business, that was tough to do, but at the same time the instruments that were available, and particularly again the instruments of water trade, so the establishment of the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holder, the ability for buybacks to take place, still whether or not it's desirable to use any of those instruments might be contested and argued about, and people in the basin naturally very concerned about the direct impact on them on any changes that might take place, but at the same time they could see they were taking place transparently within a framework which was broadly agreed. And I think that gives a lot of optimism for the future. Planning will need to continue. It will need to be very well informed about the state of the resource and the impacts on its use on those various interests. So it's not a trivial exercise, because it is intended that plans can change as the facts change, and but again, it gives a frame for then how those changes are dealt with and the impacts of those changes are dealt with. I've been involved in a lot of reforms over my career, and now I think 10 years isn't very long at all. I think most of them are a 20-year journey. So this point that it's quite remarkable how much is bedded in after 10 years, I don't think can be made strongly enough. But that doesn't mean to say that there isn't a lot of action that needs to be taken over the next 10 years to give effect to the benefits that that framework can deliver. And I think that's the point that we're still at.